You flip the switch up to the H button, and then you kind of like depress the center of the box, where it looks like somebody was angry and pressed it a lot because they were so chilly. Yep. And then you hope. Yeah. Warm is the W. And then you just kind of press it in several times and then. Yeah. And if that doesn't work, we'll snuggle appropriately.
Okay.
Side snuggle. Blinky.
Works for my sweetheart, yeah.
Okay, today is June 25, 2019. Call this meeting to order. Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We are at section 5 on our agenda tonight. Approval of minutes. 5-1 minutes, May 28, 2019. Minutes, June 11, 2019. Is there a motion?
I'll move to approve the minutes. I think I sent one change to Eve. I don't know if anything.
Thank you, Ronnie, for the motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Thank you, Karen.
I have one more,
Discussion?
if I may, one more correction. I'm not sure that I put it on the council thing. Did you get those, Eve?
I didn't get any.
Maybe I shouldn't send them that way. Yeah, the thing was, remember I was in Anchorage and tried to call in, and you noted all that. You noted all that, and it looked great. But you might want to add that the problem, just so for the record, it was the video broadcast of it from here to Anchorage was badly delayed by many, 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. That was one problem. And the other is that the picking up audio from the speakerphone was pretty shaky, particularly for me.
Summer, those were in the council comments. Can you forward those to Eve so that she has them for record? Okay, any further? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Reports. We'll go first. Sorry. I attended a homelessness coordinating committee with Mike, who is our liaison, but I was invited by Mary McGann because there was a visiting group asking questions and doing a survey of the resources that we have in Moab available to us. And at that meeting, there was a pretty significant dialogue regarding shelter. And I just wanted to bring to our attention that our zoning, if we were to do a group home, a shelter, a homelessness shelter, or a recovery shelter, or a home that is, and really, actually, I shouldn't be using the word shelter because that's language, that's kind of old language. But a rehab home or a halfway house, that it might be worth our while to look at where that would go, because it is somewhat unclear where that would fit in our zoning. And Sea Caven and others are asking, if they were to be looking into doing some kind of temporary, where would that be located? And it's not real clear that the R3 is even available for that. So something for us to consider when we're talking about zoning. I missed attending the League of Cities and Towns board meeting this last week because I was on vacation, but it's important to note that the tax task force is coming to Grand County July 20th. I unfortunately will be missing that one as well. But I have I will be swapping with Mayor Bierman of Park City. He's going to attend ours here on behalf of the league as a board member, and I'm going to attend for him at the Utah County event, which I think will be, in a way, insight for us and for them to hear what our needs are at that town meeting and in those meetings with the task force. But it's a date to put on your calendar and attend if you're able to, July 20th. Also, the League of Cities and Towns, at our board meeting, it was discussed that not only the tax task force, and Joel, I don't know if you're going to talk a little bit more about that, economic development state strategy, and the land use task force and caucuses. So, and Karen, you're probably going to speak to that as well. So, very exciting. Also, the next interim session at the Capitol is going to be August 20th, 21st. So I certainly will be attending that because that is on my calendar and I will not be out of town for that. I guess I will be in Salt Lake. I'm assuming, Joel, that you'll be attending as well. And then Karen, if you, because of you having gone last week, if you want to attend that as well, that'd be great to have a council member as well. And then another date, the League's annual convention is September 10th to 12th, and so that really is a great way for us to remain involved and connected, and we've got a lot of asks going, so it's something to put on your calendars if you're able to attend. If we're all there, that would be great. Reminder that next week is the 4th of July celebration on Thursday, and you are all going to be asked to do some level of participation by Lisa. So if you're not in town, you're not in town. But if you are, Lisa is going to be at a booth for the city. We're also going to have a dunk tank. So you'll also have the opportunity to swim if it's going to be warm. And but to answer questions and to be available for our booth. That's next week, Thursday, and all the planning is going along really well. It's going to be a fun event at Swanee City Park, and music from 7 to 9. And then also, I was contacted by Libby with mosquito abatement, and spoke with her a bit. I asked her to send me information that I can share this evening at this evening's meeting. I first asked her if she wanted to attend and give a report herself, and she is very busy, very, very busy. But she did ask me, actually, she said that she had spent time with Hala from the Moab Sun News and gave her quite a bit of information. And so she actually asked me to reference Hala's report that she published earlier today, but that the mosquito abatement district is planning to spray a chemical fog biomist 4+4 tomorrow, Wednesday, June 26th, beginning 9 p.m. Unless there's super high winds or it drops and is very cold, under 50 degrees Fahrenheit, which neither are likely to happen. Important to note, Libby is an entomologist, so she cares about all critters. And it's certainly nice to have a scientist and entomologist making the decision to spray. She's calling it a quick knockdown. But that, and also that the machine's pretty loud, so people are likely going to be hearing it if they're getting sprayed close to their homes. But that the areas that are going to be targeted are the wetlands on the western side of town, where the mosquito population and breeding grounds are concentrated. And then additional spraying might also be at Grand Oasis, the Bonderman Estate, and the Portal RV Park, the sloughs. So that is what's going to happen, and certainly you can go to the website and see that. So, the Moab Sun News for the full article. But that's where she directed me and asked me to read from instead of her reading herself, and that is all from me.
Okay, I don't have much. I Just personally wanted to thank all the first responders who came out to fight the fire that broke out on Arbor Drive, as well as the one we had the same night, I believe at Grand Oasis, and all the neighbors who were first on the fire line, I know, with some hoses. So one of the neighbors did ask me to let people know they realized when they ran out there in the street that a lot of us have a tendency to put garden hoses away. And I can understand that in the winter, but she was saying maybe if we all think about it, it's very helpful to have one outside, because she ran over to where the fire had started, couldn't find a hose, had to run back to her house, get a 100-foot hose, bring it back over. So just some things to think about as lessons learned as a first responder there, as a neighbor. I attended the SCREE event. I know I saw the mayor there, and that was a 2-day event put together by and I'll try to pronounce this properly, the Sesquicentennial Colorado River Exploring Expedition this weekend, which is a really great combination of academic presentations, films, and some art presentations as well, some Hopi dancing. But basically there's a team of academics and graduate students, artists, authors, largely USGS, so they've got journalists as well along with them, who are doing a 70-day, 1,000-mile traverse of the Colorado River Basin. This is the 150th anniversary of one of John Wesley Powell's trips, and they had some fascinating observations about conversations that they're having as they reimagine what's necessary for all of us to live within the bounds of the Colorado River Basin. We all know it's over-allocated. A lot of these folks have been studying it intensely as professors and students, and there's a lot of fascinating stuff. I filled up a lot of pages here I won't go into, but I'll try and summarize it for maybe some of the council in an email. But some of the takeaways have to do with really the fact that we don't have any choice anymore. We really have to look at living within the bounds of the water we have, and thinking as Native Americans traditionally have about thinking several generations out. And just the sense that just thinking that growth is inevitable and we'll be able to meet it with the water we have is not a wise way to be proceeding. And also introduced me, I'd heard certain terms that we're hearing with climate change, such as atmospheric rivers. These academics are coming up with some other terms to explain things that are happening. So one is catastropholous. For example, Cape Town, South Africa, but more and more communities we're seeing around the world that are running out of water, or overtapping their aquifers. And just some interesting quotes in there from officials in Cape Town saying, we just didn't know when the future would arrive. So kind of a lesson for all of us to think about as we prepare. And I guess that was it for me.
Thank you, Ronnie. Mike?
Yeah, I've mostly got water stuff as well. I did go to the Chamber of Commerce meeting, and maybe it's because they didn't recognize me, they would have recognized you. And nobody pinned me up against the wall about more. It's mostly, Elaine Geisler gave a very nice presentation on Do It Like a Local, and as always, the travel council stuff is beautifully professional. So I hope it works, okay? And otherwise, Ken Combe, who's a hydrologist the city hired to do a water study, I had started preparing some documents for you guys to try to kind of give you a simpler, non-technical understanding of what it's all about. And furthermore, that would lead to my best estimate at the moment on safe yield, which is how much water comes into the water aquifer every year. And more importantly, Emily asked a good question a while back of what we're not using so far. What could we conceivably use? Of the stuff that's just kind of going down the creek, disappears, what all was involved in actually increasing our water supplies. And I'm going to touch on that subject, but I got to wait for Ken to finish getting me his revised report. He caught some errors. We caught some errors, and he's caught more, I'm sure. So anyway, that's coming out. Chuck tells me at the end of this week, he hopes. So hopefully before too long, we'll be able to give you some really nice water presentations that'll give us an idea of how many years it will be before we really kind of have to start worrying about water. Although I will say right off the bat, one thing that is clear is that, like I say, it's kind of like oil. You guys may remember 30 years ago, I can remember we were all panicked that we were going to be running out of oil tomorrow, and we're not. But it's getting increasingly difficult and expensive to get, and we're going to find water here in the area kind of like that as well, I suspect. So it'll get complicated. And I still go to Grand Water meetings as well. The city has chipped in $1,500 towards a vulnerability to drought workshop, really is what it is. And Grand County declined to participate because they felt like the study really wasn't going to buy them anything. And I think they're kind of exposed some culture clash ideas about water, if you want to know what I think. And I try to impress on them that studies are a great idea. At least you have some idea what you're up against. But anyway, that's what they elected to do, just for what that's worth.
Thanks, Mike.
Okay, I went to a fire mitigation meeting on June 18th with the Moab Valley Fire Department, Mary McGann, Dan Kirkpatrick was there, and I'm trying to remember everybody that was there. Cara Darwin was there. Anyway, this was just a mitigation meeting, what we can do to mitigate fire danger. I will not go through the whole hour that we spent. I will just kind of hit the highlights. Moab Valley Fire Department will be the lead agency. They will be putting out press releases both on social media and in the local papers. Those social media posts especially will all be made to share, so share them as you see fit. The best thing that homeowners can do is to help make a defensible zone around your own home. Mow the cheatgrass, clear away dead limbs and brush, help your neighbors organize a neighborhood cleanup, offer your pickups and your trailers to transport yard waste if your other neighbors don't have a pickup. There will be 3 free drop-off days at the solid waste district and the transfer station. July 26th and 27th will be free drop-off days at the solid waste district, and the 27th and 28th at the transfer station. The only thing that is free is clean organic yard waste. Do not take your tires and your washers and dryers and your broken swing sets and expect to get them taken for free. Team Rubicon is planning a spring cleanup with over 200 people, and that will be concentrated mostly in the creek bottoms. The fire department and the other agencies that were involved will also, after this initial cleanup, they will assess what the need is to help people clean up that aren't able. They either don't have the equipment or they just are not able to clean up their own yards. So it really is going to be a community effort to mitigate the fire danger in our community. And I also attended a Moab Museum Board meeting. We had a really nice presentation on what is presented to the K through middle school kids as far as the museum programs. And I think I want to go back to 6th grade. That sounded fun.
Oh, but 7th grade.
No, I still want to know what I know now. I just want to be in 6th grade. The museum is moving forward really well with their plans. All of the items that have been in storage have been brought back to the museum space. The displays are being updated, and the stories are being edited to fit each of the artifacts. There is one artifact that is causing some consternation. It's a load basket. This is an artifact that was at the museum for decades. When the renovation began, it was taken to the edge of the cedars, and somehow in the ensuing time, the BLM has questioned whether we can take care of it or not. So out of that discussion, the museum has to have a disaster plan for all of the artifacts. It mirrors the county's disaster plan, same chain of command, but the museum has to prove to the BLM that we can care for this basket, and it will be in an enclosed, humidity-controlled, temperature-controlled case, and so we have to take good care of it. And there was also a barbecue that honored Regina Lopez White Skunk. She is a former councilwoman from the Ute Mountain Ute tribe. She's also the co-chair of the Intertribal Coalition for Bears Ears. And lots of good food, good company, and she was very interesting. And I'm sorry I'm taking so long. I also attended a Housing Authority board meeting. And this is just to kind of blow Ben Riley's horn. He was voted to be on the NAHRO Board of Directors.
NARO.
I don't know what that stands for.
That's a big deal.
It is a big deal. It's a national board, but they do have local chapters. But yeah, that is a big deal.
He's on the national board?
No,
Oh,
no, he's on the
Utah.
state board.
Okay.
They are moving ahead with all of their health SELT plans and all of the landscaping, except for one house, has been put in at Valley View. There is a rehab out at Sage Valley that has finally gotten USDA approval, and so that is one more home that's being rehabbed from scary to nice. And they are just waiting for some final documentations from the city so that they can conclude all of the MAPS financing and get that program underway. And they are hoping to break ground and start construction on that August 1st. And that's it.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, so the day after our last council meeting, I held the first complete count committee meeting for the census 2020. We had a great turnout, and fortunately for me, the League of Women Voters will be doing a booth at our 4th of July celebration at Swanee Park, and I thank them very much. The U.S. Census says that it takes 7 times for each individual to be reminded that the census is safe, secure, and important. So if when you're out, some of you who are out campaigning, you can maybe plug the census because it really is going to help us quite a bit in our community. June 19th, last week, I testified at the Capitol to the Political Subdivisions Committee very nervously. I wasn't as eloquent as our mayor would have been, but I got through it, and the discussion was unintended consequences of living in a resort community. I had the opportunity to discuss housing, infrastructure, transportation, ATVs, our moratorium, and balancing the needs for our residents and visitors. I participated in the ULCT's caucus on the discussion on tax reform and how it might or might not affect our community. Attended a revenue and taxation interim committee while I was there as well with Joel and Rachel. The reason we are having our July 20th legislative task force meeting is to look at it's a listening tour for the task force, and they are trying to work on our outdated tax structure. So again, please encourage individuals and businesses to come to this meeting because it's very important that we voice our opinions about taxes, and everybody has some feeling about taxes.
And to be really clear that it's state and not local.
Oh, it's not local, yes. And in fact, today was the start in Brigham City with the Legislative Task Force with their Utah tour. So we got one of the hot dates on a Saturday at probably noon.
Us in St. George got Saturdays, go figure.
Then on the 21st, I had a meeting with Liz and McKenna from the Mark. The Arts Council is interested in taking over the art displays at the airport and at City Hall. We have been awarded the traveling art exhibition through the Utah Divisions of Arts and Museums. and this was a grant that Makeda and Liz applied for, which is really great. It's a fantastic opportunity for Moab to provide public access to quality and diverse visual arts. Sunday, I went to the Mark to see a Tiny Stoop concert. The band was Let Them Roar, and it was presented by Dust Magazine. The creators of Dust, which is a grassroots arts and cultural magazine, launched last year as an internet rag. They were the recipients of an art grant given by the city. In February, I think we did that, and they just published their latest edition in print. So it was a big celebration for those gals. And it was attended by almost no one I knew and all of the town's mosquitoes.
No, there were still some at my
There
house.
was some still there. On Monday, yesterday, I had a planning meeting with the mayor and with the director of the chamber to work on our July celebration collaboration party that we're having. Activities that Emily mentioned. So they start at 10 to 2, and there's going to be booths. We have about 18 registered businesses who are going to have activities there. And then 5 to 7, there's a high school fundraiser dinner for the art club. And then the band is 7 to 9.
And free swimming.
Oh,
at
free
the
swimming
swimming
from,
pool.
yes, I think that's all day.
It's all day, but I think the open swim, the 2 to 5, is what we're hoping is that people come and participate in the booths and the sort of festivities, go swim, cool down, come back, spend money to help the arts.
Which is great.
What's the
5 to 7.
fundraiser for, Mayor?
It is for the high school art club.
To go over to Europe.
And is it a dinner?
It is a dinner. It's
Barbecue.
a pulled pork dinner.
Awesome.
Yes. And then in my time off in the last couple weeks, I've been taking mountain bike instructor classes to be able to mentor and coach the middle school and high school mountain bike team. Utah's NICA team is in its 8th year, and for the 2019 season, Chris, because I know his son competes in Colorado, we have in Utah 4,000 young riders, which makes it the largest in the U.S. No, so that's all I've been up to.
Thanks, Karen.
I was mainly traveling in the past interval, not on city business, so I don't have much, but at the solid waste, we're have improvements happening at all our facilities, road improvements at the Klondike landfill, so that'll be more reliable during bad weather. A new non-dilapidated booth and transportation flow changes up at the Moab landfill, and tomorrow we have a new baler coming to the recycling center, so we'll be able to process materials much more efficiently. Also met with the auditors for that special service district, which was it wasn't all good, but it was very educational. Good thing to be a part of. That's all I've got.
Thanks, Kellen.
But when I drove out by the Klondike landfill, there's not anywhere near as many plastic bags in the fence as there used to be.
Yep.
Good work, council. Okay, we're now on to item 7 on our agenda, administrative reports. Joel, I kind of did mosquito.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
I love going last because half my list is gone by the time it gets to me, so it works out perfect.
Yeah.
I attended the interim session with Karen and Rachel, and I want to thank them both. They did an amazing job. And if you haven't been up there a lot and you haven't spent time there, it's intimidating. And so it's not an easy task to go do, and they both did awesome. We attended Political Subdivision Committee where Karen presented, and we attended the Rural Caucus. At the Rural Caucus was quite interesting. We kind of have our own little tax world that we're living in, and was talking to Mayor Bierman from Park City. It was quite interesting to hear how our tax structure is different from theirs and how the proposed changes would affect us, it seems, much more than it would affect them. As crazy as this sounds, our economy is a little more diversified, it seems, than theirs. So and they were looking for some allies, and we were looking for allies, and it was hard to meet on some of the issues that we have. So it's gonna take a lot of work to all get us where we need to be, but we can absolutely get there. There's no doubt about that. So, and then after that, we attended the Revenue and Taxation Interim Committee up on the Hill. It was completely uneventful as they were getting ready to kick off their tour, and so that's what they were focusing on. And as you guys have all stated, our version of that will be July 20th. Andy Bierman from Park City will be with us. The open house portion with the members of the committee will be at noon, is my understanding, at the Grand Center, is
Yes.
my understanding. And then from 1 to 4 will be the actual meeting. We are trying to facilitate and are going to facilitate a meeting with you guys, with the committee prior to that. And so we will be reaching out to you guys and getting that squared away for you and making sure you have the necessary information to move forward with that. So, and again, we're gonna try and focus on the same thing Karen focused on when we meet with them, and not necessarily the sales and the tax and what the structures are doing, but the impacts that the tourist industry and that's having on us and other areas we need help as well. So if we have them here and we can give examples why they're here, we're gonna try and take advantage of that. So that's kind of where we're at with the interim session and the tax restructuring and equalization task force. The speed limit and paint on the sidewalks, or the roads and the speed limit signs that we're trying to put up, Ronnie got us some good information, and we've passed that along to Public Works, and they've started processing it, and we'll start getting that out in the,
Ronnie, thank you so much for that work that you did.
yes.
I like crosswalks.
And, yeah, we got some good info in the workshop this afternoon as well about painting on the sidewalks, and so tomorrow morning we'll address that aspect of it as well and get that going out too. So,
Thank you, Joel.
Public Works, I'm gonna just real quick, you talked about, no, not there yet, hold on, one sec, let me do a little bit.
I was so excited.
Right before we had the 2 fires 10 days ago we had Dirty Power come down from Rocky Mountain Power, and it initially knocked off the Skakel pump and water supply, and we got it up and going again, and then just a little bit while after that, it came down the line again and fried the pump.
Oh, dang.
So that pump was down, and then we had those 2 fires on that end of town right after that. So I want to thank the Moab Fire for fighting the fires and containing them, and the law enforcement for securing the scenes, and also the water crew and our Public Works guys for keeping that up and keeping water in there and keeping water supply to the lines that we're going, because I don't think anyone really knows that just, in our industry, it's not a question of if it'll happen, but when it'll happen. And literally that pump went down, and no sooner did we not have 1 fire, we had 2. So it went down, I got that notice, the chief called me and said, we have a fire, then called me and said, we got it taken care of, then called me and said, we have another fire, and I'm like, are you kidding me? So, but they all did an amazing job, and I want to thank them all. And lastly, Oscar, if you want to come on up. Oscar Antillon is our new Public Works Director, and yesterday was his first day on the job, and he's been here. We've got him introduced, and he's doing awesome things already, and he has jumped right in, and he's attended meetings, and he is chiming right in with things we need to be doing, and I am really excited. So we're happy to have him, and I don't know if he wants to say anything, but he doesn't have to if he doesn't want to. So.
No, I'm just, thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited about Moab. Utah has been kind of my home away from home. I'm originally from Mexico, but I went to school here at the U and spent many years here in Utah, and this was one of my favorite places to visit when I lived there. And that's when I started my career as a civil engineer. And so I'm excited to be here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Hope you enjoyed it.
So.
Great first name.
And that's kind of where we're at on that. We have posted some other positions, and we'll get those updates on for you when we get them. And we are going to have the department heads give you guys updates next meeting, at the first meeting of the month. We're going to try and have department heads give updates. If something comes up at the second meeting, then we'll have them come back the second meeting as well. But we'll definitely try and have every department head give you an update every first meeting. So next meeting, that's going to be on par, and we should go from there. So I had initially Chuck on there, but Chuck went home.
Yeah,
So
Chuck went home.
he's done a lot today, so we're good on that. So if there's
Okay.
any other questions or anything?
Moving right along. Section 8 on our agenda, citizens to be heard. I don't have any forms. Are there any citizens that would like to be heard this evening? Okay. Section 9, presentations. 9.1, presentation of the Trust Accountability Program, award by Utah Local Governments Trust. Doug?
Yes.
Welcome, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm Doug Folsom. I'm the Loss Prevention Manager for the Utah Local Governments Trust, and I'm here to present to Moab City the 2018 TAP Award. TAP stands for Trust Accountability Program, and the key word in that phrase is accountability. I've been doing this for about 14 years with the Utah Local Governments Trust, and over the years, one of the biggest things that I've learned is that if we're going to have success in our risk management and our safety program, we have to have accountability in those programs. Employees need to be accountable, supervisors and department heads need to be accountable, and even administrators and elected officials, need to be accountable or hold themselves accountable at least for us to be successful. Over the years, I've had the misfortune of being directly involved after the fact when there's been fatalities of public employees at different municipalities and special service districts. That's a really sad event for me, and it's something that I tried to work really hard to help avoid in the future. And so safety is something I'm very passionate about. The Trust Accountability Program helps trust members implement best practices for risk management and safety. There's about 10 areas that have been part or requirements in the TAP program over the years. This is the 4th TAP award that Moab City has received over the years, not consecutively. We had a break in the middle there, but it was received last year in 2017 as well as for 2018. And it demonstrates that we have made an effort to implement some of these best practices, which is very important. In our government entities around the state, as you well know, that we are very busy. You have a lot to do. Staff has a lot to do. There's a lot on the plate. It's really easy to let safety go to the back burner. And so we need to make sure that we're incorporating risk management and safety in everything that we do, so that it doesn't become something that's chance. I appreciated Joel saying if it can happen, it will happen, because I live in that world of risk. And it absolutely can happen. And I've seen the worst happen. Not here in Moab, since I've been working with Moab over the last 14 years, but, in the state with other entities, I've seen it happen. We really don't want to have to learn, through direct experience. We want to be able to prevent these accidents, control our costs, keep our work comp rates low, and that's something that's important to us from a financial side as well as from just doing what's right. And so that's kind of what the TAP program represents. Out of the more than 500 members of the trust in the state of Utah, there's only less than 20% of those that received the TAP award this last year. So it's not something we just give to anybody. It does require some effort. It requires doing some real activities to help prevent accidents from happening, both on a liability side as well as with your employees. And so we're very appreciative of the efforts of your staff in accomplishing these best practices, and I look forward to continuing to work with them in the future in further implementation and improvements. And we'd just like to also let you know that as a council, your support for the staff's efforts to implement good risk management and safety is essential. If you're not supporting them and having good safety programs, it's really hard for them to pull that off the back burner because of all the things that they have to worry about as well. So congratulations and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's pretty.
Mayor, from a staff point of view, I'd like to thank Carmela Galley and Marcy Mason. They are the 2 employees that are tasked with making sure this stuff happens and follow through. So I want to thank those 2 especially.
Okay. Well,
So forgive me, Doug, I got to ask, so if one of your elderly council members were down in St. George, for example, at a city-sponsored conference, and then goes out on a difficult mountain bike ride and busts his hip, does workman's comp cover that? It's kind of a joke.
I would have to say that I would leave that to our claims manager to make that call ultimately. I would hope if you were out doing a personal recreation activity that we wouldn't.
Yeah, I'm just kidding, you know, but
If you were involved in conference meetings and classes, it probably would if you were doing that, so, yes.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for making everyone nervous. That's with your question. Thank you so much, Doug.
What's a sanctioned ride?
It's a sanctioned ride. Meet Mayor Pike, right? Bike with Mike. Okay, thank you so much. It's always fun to receive awards, and it's really nice to hear also that we are in a 20% that received that award. Thank you so much. Moving right along, section 10, public hearing. 10.1, proposed resolution number 34, 2019, amending the fiscal year 2018 to 2019 budget, public hearing. I do not have any forms in front of me stating anybody is interested in speaking at this public hearing. Summer's not here, but I don't see any. Nope. Would anyone like to speak to this agenda item? I suppose I have to just get a motion to open the public hearing.
I move to open the public hearing.
Thank you, Ronnie. Is there a second?
Second.
Thanks, Tawny. All those in favor?
Aye.
And there's no one. So is there a motion to close the public hearing?
I'll move to close the public hearing.
Ronnie?
Second.
Thank you, Tawny. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. We are at 11, old business, 11.1, proposed resolution 34, 2019, amending the fiscal year 2018 to 2019 annual budget, discussion and approval. Do I have a motion?
I move to approve proposed resolution 34-2019, amending the fiscal year 2018-2019 annual budget.
Thank you, Kaylin. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Karen. Any discussion? We had no comments. Received none.
Looks good to me.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Did I need to do a roll call as it was a budget? Unanimous. Thank you. 11.2, proposed ordinance 2019-12, adopting the City of Moab pay plan schedule and adopting the exempt and elected official salaries for fiscal year 2019 and 2020, consideration and adoption. I just want to make a point to say that we do need to make a decision tonight to follow staff's recommendations. So I hope that we can get there. And I guess I'll open us up for discussion prior to asking for a motion. Where's everyone at on this item?
I'm supportive of it as proposed. I'm excited to give the rest of the city employees their COLA for the year. I'm sure they're looking forward to it too. I intend to make a small modification to the elected officials' pay schedule. To propose that.
Would you like to elaborate on that for other council members?
Sure. I was thinking of modifying attachment B, section 2, for January 1st to June 30th, 2020, the 6-month prorated for the second half of the fiscal year, to reduce the mayor and council member pay by $2,000 for that period, which would result in $4,000 reduction annually. As proposed.
Is that greater than 2%? I mean,
Pardon?
it would be, I think.
2%? What?
Well, you said you proposing to reduce the salaries of elected employees starting beginning of next year from what has been suggested in Rachel's proposal here by
$2,000 each?
$2,000.
Okay.
Do you care to elaborate on why?
I just feel that it just seemed a little high. I mean, it's subjective, but it just seemed, the proposed pay seemed a little high to me for the work that we do. And I got the impression that there was there's been some individual discussions among council members about not doing the COLA for ourselves, and I feel like the COLA is appropriate because it just maintains purchasing power of our salary. It's not an actual adjustment up or down, and so I feel like it's more appropriate I think it's a good thing to do a COLA for the council's salary year in and year out, so that, but that if we think that the salary should be adjusted for substantive reasons, that we do that directly, as I'm prepared to propose in my motion.
Okay. What about other council members? Were there changes that you wanted to make in any of the exhibits?
Yeah, if I may, Mayor. I want to thank Rachel for giving me the history of the last 22 years, apparently, of salary and benefits history and so forth. And I've come around to the notion that an awful lot of you guys do a world of essentially nearly at least full-time work, and the mayor is definitely a full-time job and so forth. As an alternative to what you suggested, if particularly some of you guys, if you're, I grant you that the benefits package is a big chunk of change, and unfortunately we can't buy a half a benefits package. We either got to do it or not do it. And for that reason, the percentage raise of total compensation this year looks like a big number. But however, I want to point out that we're starting off pretty meager salaries. And so as an alternative to what Kaylin suggested, I would be comfortable foregoing the COLA raise. I grant you it's only 2% this year, with the understanding that we may well wish to do COLA for ourselves in succeeding years when we won't be adding on an expensive benefits package as well. So that would be my alternative if you guys want to do that. Otherwise, I'm fine with the motion the way it stands.
It seems like Kaylin's suggestion is kind of a compromise to that.
No, he's talking about more money,
Oh, it doesn't,
more money, less money in your pocket.
Yeah. 2% is a lot less of a reduction than 2,000. 2% reduction in the next 6 months is a lot less of a reduction than from the proposal than 2,000 in the second half of the fiscal year.
oh, true.
Yeah, so for example, council salaries around 9,000, so 2% would be 180 bucks, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a lot less.
Okay, thanks, Mike, for sharing your thoughts. Ronnie?
I guess I have a few things to say, not to bore people, but since you probably wonder what the heck goes through our minds with this stuff. First of all, I would be very happy if the universe shifted and we did not have to vote on this about ourselves, because it is very awkward. That said, I guess I have asked if the public could vote on it, or if we could have a committee come together and make some suggestions, but it seems like in terms of majority interest, that wasn't there. So I guess the time comes and you have to make a comment. It's awkward because it's, if you approve anything, it is definitely self-serving. I mean, I don't think we can honestly say this is for future councils, because it takes effect in January. So at least some folks will still be here, and all of us who are incumbents are running again, so we may or may not still be here. So I take responsibility for the part of this that recognizes there's definitely a personal advantage to be had here. I know in the beginning I said I can't really see how you can justify something this high, but we kept getting kind of new chunks of information every time, and we looked at the TechNet, Telnet numbers from other communities in Utah, and it looked like of the numbers we had for communities in Utah, maybe half of the councils who were part-time, a little bit less maybe, had health insurance, and half that were part-time, a little bit more than half, didn't have it. There was only one community listed that was full-time, but it wasn't a listing of all communities in Utah because people have to give information to that system voluntarily. It makes you think. Then we got the history on the fact that this council anyway, or well, previous councils for the city of Moab, had insurance through 2014 and the mayor through 2018. And at least from a rhetorical level, to me, that made it more defensible in the sense that you're going back to a benefit that the city was offering and just hasn't these past few years. I guess my outstanding concern is we have a lot of unknowns with the budget in the coming years. We'll probably know a lot more about the sales tax stuff in the next 6 months to a year. And I realize that every council moving forward has to make this decision about compensation. I mean, we're required to do this by law every year. So whatever we do for this coming year may be different a year from now. I guess after thinking about it for a long time, I feel like I've watched the people here work very hard, and I've watched a lot of people, I think, be sicker than they maybe would have been if it wasn't for the stress of this job. And I do know, ideally, we'd be living in a country with healthcare for everyone, and our system is inherently unfair. That said, if the majority of people here want to run the experiment of seeing what it's like to put it back, and it has historically been there, I'm willing to do that. I definitely, if I was still here next year, would want to see where we were budget-wise, because I am kind of concerned about if our budget is going to be the same next year or if things are going to be changing. And I would be willing to support Kaylin's suggestion for a decrease of $2,000.
Thank you, Romy. Others?
I'm still having a difficult time justifying it. I'm adding on the possibility of tax issues that we don't know how are going to affect us. So, and I voted against the budget for this very issue, so I'm going to be consistent and vote against it.
Okay.
And I am for the proposed budget. As with Mike, I was thinking taking the COLA portion off of it, and then have had discussions with Kaylin and the buying power of the reasons for the COLA. I feel COLA is for employees. We're a different subsect of the city, not, we aren't employees, but, so I would be comfortable, I am comfortable either way going with keeping the COLA or reducing by $2,000 as well.
So it seems like we need to separate because nobody has any problem with the other items for approval. I don't know if we need to separate or have the motions, have it be one motion. Do you know what I'm saying? Have two?
I mean, are we just dealing with, because I do have a question about where we landed with the planning commission. I was a little surprised to see the increase. I was just curious where everybody else was with that. Did the assumption to raise that? I mean, it seemed like there was only two of you who brought that up our last meeting, so I was curious what everybody else thought.
I think if you're going to use the argument that raising salary is going to attract more qualified or better people to council, you have to apply it to planning commission. I don't think $50 stipend is an awful lot to pay for each meeting. It doesn't bother me.
I mean, $75.
No.
So I'm sorry, Tony, so you're comfortable with the 75, Tony? Did I hear that correctly? Okay.
Okay. Everybody else?
Well, I could make a motion if you would entertain one. It may or may not pass.
Okay.
I have to push the right button here.
Unless anybody beats Mike, do it.
I move to approve proposed ordinance 2019-12, an ordinance adopting the City of Moab pay plan schedule and adopting exempt and elected officials' salaries for fiscal year 2019 through 2020 as described in the accompanying literature, with the exception that for the first, the latter half of the first fiscal year, that the salaries for elected officials do not include a cost of living adjustment.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second?
I would second.
Thank you, Karen. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? So motion fails.
Okay.
I move to approve proposed.
So it was, sorry, so,
Mike were
go ahead.
for.
Yep.
Kaylin, Tawny, and Ronnie were against, opposed. Nay. Whatever term you want to use.
Thank you.
I move to approve proposed ordinance 2019-12, an ordinance adopting the City of Moab pay plan schedule and adopting the exempt and elected official salaries for fiscal year 2019-2020, modifying Attachment B, Section 2, elected officials' compensation, January 1st to January 30th, 2020, prorated for 6 months, as mayor, $18,705, council members, $15,407.
Wait, what?
Thank you,
That's a
Kaylin.
$2,000 reduction for the prorated.
Is there a
period.
second?
Okay.
I'll second.
Thank you, Ronnie. Discussion. So Kaylin, just to describe.
So those are the numbers that are in the packet minus in Attachment B, Section 2, minus $2,000, which if it were annualized would be $4,000 less than what's proposed for our annual pay, but is still a substantial increase. It includes the health insurance benefit, plus still includes some base salary.
Gotcha.
Thank you. Any further discussion on that?
Okay, so so Kaylin, so you're agreeing with all the benefits portion of what Rachel suggested here in the memos that we have in front of us, and your only change then is to what she called item number 1, current council member annual salary and so forth, and you're proposing a $4,000 per year reduction in council members' salaries. And what was the number for the mayor? A similar figure for the mayor?
Same
18,705.
reduction.
The same.
The same reduction.
The same
Same
reduction.
reduction. Okay, I thought I heard you said $4,000 for half a year, which would be 8 for her, but that's not the case.
That's not what the motion was, no.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? Is there something that we
I
need
just,
to know?
we missed who seconded the motion, that was all.
You missed what?
Who seconded the
Seconded.
motion?
Ronnie.
I did.
Okay, so that's bringing it to $333 a month, basically, so,
I
Is that-
haven't figured it out.
okay,
per month.
so, I mean, just to point out, though, in 2014, I mean, that's less than the 500 that council made.
Yes, and health insurance costs substantially more, and we have the option of receiving that as cash. Or if we have a family, if we don't have a full family, then it'll be prorated. So, but I think that's a good argument.
Yeah, no, I'm just pointing out, in 2014, it was $21,000 for a family of 3 plus $500 a month. So, I mean, theoretically, we're going, I know insurance has gone up $4,000, but we're taking that off, so we're going to pre-2015 rates. So So just to put that out there.
I would welcome an attempt to amend my motion or a substitute motion, should you choose to do so, since those are the procedures we operate under, and that is your prerogative.
I'd like to comment to some of Ronnie's concerns, if I may. There are concerns about budget, and there are concerns about revenue, and there always will be, in particular at the legislature. And I think all of us should keep in mind that if push comes to shove, and the city's budget falls on hard times, and we'll have to start making across the board those reductions that certainly include elected employees' salaries, if that's what it comes to, and that would just be. But while the money is there, I'm not sure I would let that get in the way at this time, as long as you can keep in mind that he may have to make those sacrifices later on.
Any further discussion? Or I'll call for the vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Show of hands, please.
Yeah. Opposed? Okay, motion passes 4-0. 4-1. 1. Sorry. You count.
I still
And
count.
I apologize.
I didn't even notice.
4-1. 11-3, planning update, land use and overnight accommodations. Nora, our new planning director. Please join us
I would love to.
for part 2 of uncomfortable conversations.
I prepared, I'll talk into the microphone. I prepared a little sort of summary for you all about where we are in this process that hopefully will answer some of your questions. And then I am looking for some guidance on some issues tonight. So since your last meeting, we had a really productive workshop with the Planning Commission, and we talked about some specific issues primarily around what to do with existing overnight accommodations and how to make them legal and not non-conforming. I know that's a double negative, but making them legal conforming uses. And they talked about a number of options, and based upon their direction, I drafted an ordinance, which is out there for public review, and the Planning Commission will be holding a public hearing on it on Thursday. So just in terms of where we are in the process, as you all know, we've been talking a lot about this, and we've had a number of hearings, focus groups, advisory committee, joint work sessions, and direction has been given to us from the City Council and the County Council and the Planning Commission and City Council on various occasions. Some pretty direct direction about where the way we should go. And so the Planning Commission is scheduled to hold a public hearing on June 27th, which is on Thursday. And they may or may not make a recommendation to the City Council at that time. If they don't, then they will hopefully make a recommendation on July 11th to the City Council. The City Council does not have to have a public hearing on this item because the Planning Commission public hearing is the only thing that's required statutorily. And so you will consider the draft ordinance at either your next regularly scheduled meeting on the 9th or the following meeting on July 23rd. And the temporary land use regulation expires on August 12th.
Can I just want to say a quick thing.
Yes.
I just want to encourage council members that have, whether it's email listservs or circles or the people that you correspond with, that knowing that we are not having a public hearing here, that it would be critical for all of us to get the word out about Thursday's public hearing.
Right. And I would encourage you to send out to anyone you know the packet that I sent to the Planning Commission that I shared with all of you. Because the staff report is kind of lengthy, but it kind of goes through where we've been, and so the public can kind of understand where we've come from. So what does this proposed ordinance do? And this is really based on direction from the council and also from the Planning Commission. So it adds a definition for overnight accommodations, since that's what we've been referring to consistently. So they're not calling it 5 different things. It removes all overnight accommodation uses from the list of permitted uses in the C1. It's only bed and breakfast in the C1, but C2, C3, C4, RC, and SAR zones. Adds language in each of the zones that allows established overnight accommodations to remain as legal conforming uses. Adopts an established overnight accommodations map. So
Will we be defining established? Will
Yes.
established be a definition?
That's a good point. Yes, established. I'll write that down. Define. And I actually have a draft of a map that our engineering department did, which is gorgeous. And it will need, one of the things we're going to do with the Planning Commission is, right now, what the map shows is existing places that we've gotten business licenses for. And we all know there are those projects like the buildings along Williams Way. Some of those have nightly rental licenses. They were built, intended to be nightly rentals, so we'll need to look at whether we want to take a look at that whole strip of lots along Williams Way and add them to the map, whether or not they have existing business licenses. So I'll be talking, and that's just an example, but we'll be talking to the Planning Commission about that. And we'll be taking a look at the map. And then the ordinance goes on to direct city staff and Planning Commission to continue to work without undue delays on new zoning provisions to allow new overnight accommodations in some areas. The new provisions will better reflect the long-term interests of the city. And then overnight accommodations that are they have business licenses and are continuing to operate in the residential zones are and will remain legal non-conforming uses.
Will there be language in the new zoning language, proposed ordinance, that restricts redevelopment?
Not at this time.
Because that could be an implication for us, at least to understand.
We don't, so this is what we talked about with the Planning Commission, and the last bullet here talks about what happened to all the stuff that Landmark has been working on. And what Landmark has been, well, first, their public process was extremely helpful, and the draft overlay ordinance provisions that they worked on are certainly a really good step toward coming up with what we want to see in terms of overnight accommodations, and then we get to decide where we might want to allow those. I don't believe what we've received from Landmark is really ready for consideration and adoption, and the Planning Commission concurred with that. There's a fair amount of subjective language in there, and we also wanted them to address some additional things, some of the environmental issues and some of the other things, and clarify some of the language. So we'll continue to work on that, and there's a real commitment and actually kind of an excitement from the Planning Commission to really dive in deep as soon as possible to come up with our new regulations for new overnight accommodations, and then also we'll be looking at where and how we might want to apply those new regulations, whether it's an overlay or there are certain zones that we want to say it's okay with these new provisions. But primarily, I think what we're looking at is having overnight accommodations that better meet the needs of the community as a whole by requiring mixed use and regulating some of the scale issues and architectural interest. And with that, we also want to talk about redevelopment and additions and, how much of a building, existing buildings, and what we want to do about additions to those existing buildings or redevelopment of them. We are not, the way the ordinance is drafted, I have not addressed that. Now,
Perhaps you could in the established definition,
okay,
which is why that's what prompted that question.
okay, great.
But then that would be like that could be an amendment to a definition down the road if we wanted to change how we define established. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. And obviously, there are going to be lots more changes that are needed.
I mean, or for example, maybe what you're driving, driving at, Mayor, is the definition of an established development business parcel would include language that might say that does not differ substantially from its incarnation, if you will, as of this date, for example.
Correct,
In other words,
I think.
does that make any sense? In other words, if you had a hotel that had 100 rooms and somebody wanted to add another 100 rooms, that would clearly be a violation of the definition of existing.
Yes.
Okay. Well, that
And we can
might
make
be
that,
one
we
easy
can
way
make
to
that
do
more
it.
clear. Yes. And I'm not sure, I'll have to think about whether that wants to be in the definition or we want to provide a definition and then make clear in the ordinance provisions somewhere in the zones what that means. The one thing I needed some guidance from you on is the C2 zone. I know there's been some discussion about the C2 zone and whether or not you want to allow applications for new accommodations and limit the scale. I have not written that into the draft ordinance, but I certainly can if you all give me direction to do so. And Chris hasn't even really reviewed the ordinance yet, so he'll get a shot at that in the next day or two. He was out of town. So there will be some revisions that will come up either between Planning Commission and City Council or for that meeting of the Planning Commission on the July 11th, depending on what they want to do. We may be able to make the changes on Thursday, but if they're not comfortable with that, then we can move it to the 11th.
So the question that I'm understanding that you're asking of this council is with respect to the C2 zone and in a more general sense, whether or not we as a council want to continue to allow overnight accommodations in one zone so that it is allowed somewhere.
That's one of the benefits, is to give you some of that legal coverage.
Sorry, let me just finish.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were done.
And a possibility, if we were to continue to allow it in C2, that we could allow it but amend it to reduce the number. Right now, the number is less than 10, that we could reduce that number to less than 3 or less than 4 or less than 5 as a way to secure the existing use, knowing that there are more flexible uses in the C2 than in other zones, knowing that all overnight accommodations that are current will be codified as existing and permitted. But that this would be another step for us to consider.
And when we come up, when we do come up with, it's kind of the overlays or whatever they are to better regulate new overnight accommodations, we can certainly apply those in the C2 as well. I mean, this is a process. Mm-hmm. Evolutionary, not revolutionary, but, it's a process, and so that would be part of it.
So it's something for this, that's what you're asking this council for
Yes.
direction on, specifically in the C2.
Correct.
Can I ask you a quick question? So in the C2 currently, it's units under 10 or is it?
Correct, are
So how is the Entrada built? How, I mean, that, how many unit, isn't that?
42.
42 units? So,
They are subdivided, individual ownership lots.
so how are we going to prevent whatever our magic number is?
Larger parcel in the.
Yes.
We wouldn't, but, and that's a very good point
We-
of why that,
That's what I wanted to say. That's not, what
Very
you
good
suggested
point.
won't do you any good.
very good point.
We could do per acre?
Yeah,
We
there's
could do-
ways we could work it in. We could come up with a policy code that would allow it to where you could limit the number based off square footage, all sorts of things. So that if the concern is that they're gonna just subdivide it down to these small lots, we can come up with a policy scheme that would allow us to prevent that, if that's what we wanna do.
I want to make sure I understand. So are we talking about not changing the C2? So if there is an empty lot in the C2 now, that someone could continue to develop a new overnight rental there?
Yes.
Okay, I would be opposed to that.
I mean, I
because
am-
it doesn't reflect
Yeah.
what we've been asked to do by the public, in my opinion.
Nora, could you give me a 60-second, no more, if you will, dissertation, if you will, on, I had originally hoped in C2 that if, you know, somehow magically or short-term rentals went away, that we could redevelop the area to be businesses and long-term rentals and so forth. And I've heard arguments that that's just not going to happen. So could you, in which case I do not wish to penalize existing owners, but I would do so only if there was some benefit to the city in doing so. But, so tell me your opinion. Am I just kind of beating my head here against the wall? I suspect so.
My opinion on what specifically?
On the C2.
On the possibility
Yeah,
that if
the
people
C2.
didn't do short-term rentals in the C2 zone and in Toronto, or Williams Way, for example, that as the years passed by, that people would convert them to businesses or long-term rentals and.
They may. And down the line, we could change the zoning if the character of the area changes.
Well, the argument's been made, Karen, for example, pleaded that, and it makes some sense, that because Entrada and Williams Way were built specifically to be
Right.
overnight rentals, that the likelihood of that happening was poor. Maybe just because the way the buildings are built would preclude their use for any other type of use. But I'd like to get your opinion on that. Maybe you just gave it. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I did. I mean, I think, for example, I was talking to someone yesterday or today. I've been talking to a lot of people, a lot of these existing owners of projects or of units that they may be living in now, but when they retire, they want to do nightly.
Yeah.
And so they don't have a business license today, but that's been in their kind of plan, their life plan. So I've talked to a number of those kinds of people. And so that kind of speaks to if an area like along Williams Way, for example, that all of those, since their character is fairly similar to each other, that it be allowed, and that people can rent them long-term, or people can rent them nightly, and go back and forth depending on what their sort of life needs are. So that's, I think, part of the thinking along the C2 zone. There's also a couple little parcels that are pretty much surrounded by existing overnight accommodations that it may make sense to allow them to go ahead because it's kind of infill if we limit the scale. So it's really a policy question for you folks. I did not draft it in the original ordinance draft, but you know, if it's something that you want us to address, we can.
I think we haven't decided to do this, but I think if we're trying to use business licenses to regulate overnight rentals just in the C2 zone, it skews our numbers because it's going to look like you have 400 when you really only have 200. If they're all licensed as an overnight rental, but they're not used as such.
Right, we're trying to get away from licensing, from requiring the licensing so that people can live, have long-term rentals and they can, or they can live there themselves until such a time as, you know, their lifestyle changes.
But they still have the option, if their life changes or their needs change, they can still rent that as an overnight rental.
Or if they get a business license.
Yeah, and so
Do
that's,
they have to have a business license currently to
No.
do that in the future? Okay.
That's not as
not as it
anticipated.
stands now. The problem we're trying to address here is, like Nora was just saying, the parcels that are left in the C2 are essentially surrounded by existing overnight rentals. So it more than anything be infill. Those properties that are already being used as overnight rentals, or those who wish to continue to in the future, if you don't allow it in the C2, are going to have to vest their right somehow through most likely a business license action. And then the number will be skewed. And then those overnight rentals will become permanent overnight rentals as far as the use is concerned, because they won't be willing to give up that use. You will essentially lock in, you're right, the 12 parcels that are currently surrounded by overnight rentals will not become future overnight rentals. But everything that's currently developed as an overnight rental, you will guarantee will stay an overnight rental. So that's kind of the policy we're asking you is, you're right, Karen, it's possible that those parcels in the C2 could develop out in Entrada style and become, those 12 parcels that are left could become overnight rentals. But if we say, okay, no, we're taking it out of the C2 entirely, you're going to have to protest and become a grandfathered right through business licensing, more likely than other.
It's
But
actually through the map.
Yeah.
that exists. Yeah.
and you're locking in
Oh, so
those.
not contested, but just mapped. You have to be mapped.
You're going to lock in those as if you use a grandfather provision, you're going to lock them in, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just to go back to what Mike's question is. So my argument was the overnight rentals that we have now, I do not see that those are going to go into full-time housing. That an Entrada unit at $575,000 is not going to be sold to a business to stick in 6 employees. I mean, they're high-end condos. They're going to go to people from Park City and Aspen who sit on those and have them empty for 8 months out of the year, like all the housing in Telluride. So
Well, you're describing an unhealthy situation from my point of view.
well, I mean, I think the reality, though, Mike, is that, I mean, if we open up the C2 for people to use it as overnight, I'm saying the existing, not the raw land of C2. The existing C2 units that are in existence right now, if they have that flexibility to go back and forth, they're more likely to be able to rent to somebody full-time temporarily and then go back into nightly rentals.
Well, this is
Okay, so
where
if we
the
remove-
definition of established is going to be critical.
Yep.
So I'm inclined to say that, number one, on our planning commission, we've got diversity, and they're going to be looking at this issue. Number two, there's a public hearing. I'm sure we're going to hear from the homeowners associations and those living in the C2, what their opinion is about this. And then the planning commission's going to churn it, and then let's see what butter comes out of there.
Nora, can
So
I?
can you
Like,
give
we
me
don't
a-
have to,
Can you,
so, to finish what I was saying, like, we don't have to come to a fine point tonight.
right,
As long as we're clear, as long as you feel like we're clear with, at least direction moving forward, and we're okay to hear from the public and to hear from the planning commission how, you know, kind of recommendations of moving forward with this. You know what I mean?
Yes.
so if we remove overnight rentals in the C2 zone on the parcels that have not been developed, does that in any way bias any housing?
perhaps.
Yeah.
It could theoretically. I mean,
Maybe.
those parcels would then be available for residential development.
Or
Well,
other
well,
commercial
Or
hold on.
commercial development.
Yeah, I was just gonna
That's, I
say,
mean, that's
if
what
you,
we
if
are
you just,
trying to,
in your hypo that you said, if you just remove overnight rentals in a C2, and those parcels stay C2, they're not gonna be residential development, because they're still gonna be in a C2, so arguably no, but
That's not-
depends on how the
Right.
the level of density you're going with on a complex that's being built.
So it seems like we're talking about two tools to, for existing overnight accommodations to be legal uses, but not legal conforming uses. One is to change the language of the zoning itself, and the other is via a mapping or overlay process.
Yeah, both together. Not a mapping process.
Yeah,
Map and
but I'm
language.
hearing that another option is just to change the language about C2, which would then just reduce the future development potential of undeveloped lots, but then for existing units that have already been developed, they would not be non-conforming.
No, they'd be a permitted use in that scenario.
So are you
So-
okay with the former?
No, I'm going to continue with this line of thought. And so just using the overlay approach, which we're talking about doing for future development, whereby developments would be brought into, approved in the overlay on the basis of merit, presumably by some reasonable criteria. Could that same process be applied to existing development? So rather than just either making them all legal non-conforming or letting all the existing C2 residential type development have a,
So you have an overlay that's adopted essentially immediately that allows those that are currently have overnight rentals to be a permitted use under the overlay, and those who don't to not be.
well, they could apply to be. I mean, I'm hearing that.
Yeah, initially under the overlay to not be though.
What I'm hearing is that to not be legal non-conforming, to be legal conforming has value.
Yes.
Definitely.
It's
And so,
value for everyone, including the city. I mean, it just, the logistics of us not having to keep track of legal non-conforming uses is, especially if 95% of the zone is already done.
And it also, you get into issues with lending and,
Yes.
financial arrangements. Financial institutions don't like non-conforming uses very much.
And normally a non-conforming use within a land use code, a land use structure is the anomaly to the rule. You're keeping track of the 1%, the small number. That's what is so uncomfortable from our standpoint as a staff, is we're keeping track of 95% of the zone, not the 1% of the zone. It's kind of the opposite of what it's normally used for.
So I'm going to bring up a point and ask some questions. For anyone who doesn't know, I live down the street on 200 East. I've lived there since 2002. My husband has lived there since 1998 for almost, I'm just going to say, because I can't remember the exact dates, but let's say 18, 19 years, I'll do the math later. We had a resident living behind us, a single guy, on the C2 lots behind us. That property now belongs to Community Rebuilds, and they are housing interns there. So I'd like to make the point that C2 can actually house people, and it actually has a history of doing it for a good amount of time. And I did have a number of questions in the shared document that I'm just going to bring up because I think they're still pertinent. I read the summary of the June 13th Planning Commission meeting, and I also listened to the recording. And I was clear on the fact that they liked the idea 3 in the end, probably most of all, but I got a little bit confused on how and why, or really out of the 4 ideas, kind of what the pros and cons of them were. I had a little bit of trouble weighing that, but I got the impression maybe the Planning Commission did too. But in the end, I was just trying to figure out why 3, so I was hoping you can help me, Nora, kind of floated up over the idea 2, which they discussed some, which was the existing OA overlay. Can you just remind me why they preferred number 3, which is what's presented here? Yeah.
Well, either one, but they thought it was cleanest. When you look at it, when somebody comes in and they're trying to figure out what to do with their property, they look at the code, they go to the zone. And part of the difficulty with our current zoning regulations is it's got pieces of stuff everywhere. I mean, the sign code's in the building and construction section, you know? So when somebody goes to the zoning ordinance and is looking up a zone, if it's, as much information is in that zone, then that makes it a lot simpler for people to figure out what they can do and what they can't do. That's the real philosophy behind actually having it in the zone language as opposed to a separate overlay.
Okay.
It could work either way.
But essentially, you end up with the same map, am I right? 'Cause
Yes.
Either way, you would be drawing polygons around existing
Yes.
overnight accommodation. Okay, thank you.
Well, Nora, in addition to the map, for this nifty, great map, by the way, every little blue square that represents an existing OA use, isn't there a long spreadsheet, a written document someplace
Yes.
that lists all
Yes.
business A, business B, business C, so it's a big, which will stay on the books for a long time, right? I mean, we basically have to make a snapshot, if you will, of what the town looked like
Yes.
at this time.
Until we come up with our new regulations. And once we come up with that and we start applying those to zones, then it becomes, then we can reevaluate and see what we want to do.
I want to respond to what you said, Ronnie, because I don't know why I didn't think about it when I was giving my administrative report. So being at the Homelessness Coordinating Committee and there being discussion about where a shelter might be. The reason why Community Rebuilds purchased that parcel in the C2 was because you could have both residential multifamily and office. And so you bring up an extraordinary point that I can't believe that I haven't even said myself, in that if overnight accommodations are restricted in C2, that it could actually open up for uses like that.
Well, it's one of the reasons I feel importantly about restricting it for empty lots at any rate.
And that's how the transitional housing that was built on Williams Way, they benefited from the C2 because it's office and residential
Well,
and multifamily.
at least on this side of town, a lot of it is directly bordering homes. And since we hardly have any C1 anymore, I mean, it's our buffer
Right.
for transitioning. Yeah.
And those are the parcels that, like, that homelessness coordinating committee is looking for to build structures.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't really care what anyone says, but having been someone who lives in this situation, going from residential to right next door to an overnight rental who has no manager on site is not a buffer.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I have a lot of years of experience with that.
So I guess, I mean, I could draft sort of an option on the C2, or I could not. If you guys just want to not allow it allow it with the map on like Williams Way, but not include vacant parcels on the map. If that's your direction, that's fine. That's the way it's drafted right now. I could draft some provisions so you can go either way, or.
But again, firmly stating that existing would fall under the established and would be protected as
Absolutely.
a use,
Absolutely.
as a legal conforming use.
Yeah, and I might have heard wrong, sorry, but when I listened to the Planning Commission's meeting on the 13th, I mean, that's kind of the impression of the direction I thought they were going in, was polygons around existing,
Yes.
but not going past that.
Exactly, that's what they had talked about. Because they hadn't talked about the C2 idea was sort of something that I think some of you all were talking about. So that's why I'm asking, should I move forward and draft something or not?
But do we dismiss what Kaylin's saying, that there's value to the overnight rental units that exist right now? Should they have to have a buy-in to have a a legal conforming use.
My impression so far is that that's very tricky legally, but I'll let these two talk, because I thought in the beginning we started had those conversations about licensing and maintaining the license, but the more I read from them, I got the impression that that was really messy.
It seems you're on the right path with what you were doing with the,
Yeah, I think we talked about some of those options last month, and I think the Planning Commission felt that keeping it simple right now was really the best approach. And again, tying business license to a zoning entitlement is not what business licenses are really for. I mean, they're for licensing a business. They're for, to make sure there's a property management company and just the operational stuff, not necessarily the land use. So, and that's totally up to you too. I mean, if you decide you want them to become non-conforming and have to somehow buy into conformance, I'm not sure if that could be done. I would defer to Chris.
My comments to staff were, and to the Planning Commission were, and it echoes what's been said already, is that non-conforming uses are inherently difficult to administer. They're the exception rather than the rule. And they do create real consequences for property owners in terms of what you can and can't do, even to the point of limiting your ability to remodel or add some amenity. And so that we should think long and hard about outlawing otherwise lawful uses that have existed for a long time. And the best approach is to try to confine them, preserve them as lawful uses, and then define what you want to do with land that is yet to develop.
yeah, I think, I agree with Chris. I think the octagon path's the correct path for the most part for what we're trying to do. The non-conforming use isn't a great idea. The complete removal where it would just be out of the C2, or we'd just be talking densities at that point. I don't know that that's the route we want to go either, so.
And just to
You're on the correct path.
And to go back to the, we've talked a lot about the C2 zone. I mean, it is a zone that allows certain types of housing uses, and including duplexes, single family, multifamily. If you wanted to confine overnight accommodations to particular areas within that zone, you might indirectly free up some land that could be developed for housing. It depends on what your objective is. I think what I've heard through this process is you want to rein in new overnight lodging or accommodation uses and try to make more space for housing. So if that's the direction you want to give to us, that's what we'll do.
But in commercial use, not just housing.
Yeah, and which is already an
Because
allowed
that's
use.
what we're really lacking.
Yeah.
as
Or
well.
commercial on the ground floor and housing above it.
Right, or, there are exceptions for ground floor if it's affordable, and so, yeah. And there are a lot of commercial uses in the C2 that are allowed, so there are certainly options for those people who have vacant property. It's not like we're taking their property rights completely away.
Right.
So there's still lots of options for them to gain beneficial use of their property.
Yeah, well, Nora, you offered to list us some options. For me, it still might be useful if it doesn't take too much time, but I can see as Landmark put it, option 1 to 5. In other words, we could, at one extreme, give up on C2 altogether about short-term rentals, okay? I mean, just even take the undeveloped real estate and say, fine, whatever you want to do is not worth fighting the battle. I personally don't want to go there myself, but that's one extreme. The other extreme is to carefully identify which townhomes and so forth are licensed and operating as short-term rentals now, and draw a very detailed little map. Even if you've got one parcel that's surrounded by 15 properties that are all licensed overnight rentals, but there's one who's not, try to say, hey, we're going to push on you. We're not going to grant you that sort of status. To, as Karen originally suggested, and some others, I think, to forgetting about the ones that are heavily overnight rentals, and so one guy who's surrounded by others, well, he's going to be an overnight rental, and quit worrying about him, and just try to tag the undeveloped, the larger undeveloped parcels. I think, Kalen, you said there was 14 acres altogether, something like that, by your calculation.
Parcels is what I recall you talked about, like you said.
Well, I think staff may have done a more precise, but yeah, something like that.
So, I mean, it's not clear to me which way to go. Okay, so if you could, you and Planning Commission sort of evaluate the trades of that, I think that'd be
We can talk
great.
about that.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Any further discussion? Thank you so much for this
Yes.
clarifying memo.
Mayor.
So I've heard that there's some desire among staff that they think it's prudent that we have some, we don't completely rule out future.
No. I think we have all talked and are fine with you rolling it out initially, but with the understanding that long-term, that is not viable. And I think initially when this process got started, I think that there was this clamor amongst the masses, and rightfully so, I don't want to disparage it, but that this needs to be shut off and be done with. And we just wanted to make that point last meeting that that's legally probably not viable. That if we do shut the flow off, that we need to be prepared that over time, that it will have to be turned back on to some degree.
I'm kind of confused, though, because I feel like the stories we've read about what the county's doing don't reflect that.
You don't feel like the county's preparing overlays and preparing to adopt
I
overlays
don't
that'll
feel
allow
like they're talking
overnight
about the
rentals?
same short timeline for having to re-allow new overnight accommodations.
Can we talk about that, you and I?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I just feel like in the articles I've read and yeah.
And, you know, we can't promise within a certain number of months, but I think that it's important that we be diligent about moving forward with creating these opportunities, and then you can decide when and where you want to apply those. And I think the county's I mean, they have so many units that are vested right now, and maybe they want a slower time frame. I don't know. I haven't talked to them about that. So, and what they did was they took the 3 overlay zones that Landmark came up with for them and applied those only to the existing multifamily projects. So, in effect, those projects all sort of become non-conforming because they don't comply with the new overlay standards. But that's getting complicated. So they just chose a slightly different approach to deal with the established or existing nightly rental overnight accommodations. But I think they will eventually follow up as well.
So just to continue my thought, I wonder if in this intermediate period between like the moratorium and like this more fleshed out overlays, if we could still have a North Corridor overlay, but with really high standards, that was more like our aspiration for what we think that
Like living building challenge.
sustainable and equitable tourism looks like in Moab version 4. Like exactly, like it's just go ahead and say the standard is LBC, mixed use, and more housing buy-in than we currently require. And while we're working this out, see if we get any applicants that are maybe a little bit more value-driven than profit-driven, and just put it out there as an option while we continue to do the more nuanced overlay work.
My question about that is how detailed does that have to be? Because the day the moratorium ends and you walk in the door and say, okay, well, I'm interested in doing this, if we don't have enough detail in it, I guess that's my legal question.
That would be.
Yeah, if the day the moratorium ends, there's not a replacement ordinance on the books that imposes higher standards, then the default standards that existed pre-moratorium are what are going to apply. Now, I think what Nora's saying to you is that during the moratorium, what will be delivered to the council for approval will be something that changes on a permanent basis what's an allowed use in a number of zones, with the understanding being that there are going to be more detailed substantive standards that are going to be developed over time that's going to allow that lodging use to come back in.
Right, but my question is, by August 12th, if we say, you know, we want living building challenge and we want these mixed use and we want these other things, is that enough for staff to have on paper? You know, if
By
I came in the
August
door
12th?
August
I think it'd be
13th
tough.
and I said, okay,
Heavy lift, don't you think, Nora?
I want to do this.
Well-
Okay, so all it says on here is I need living building challenge. I mean, not that that's easy, but
It's not easy. I mean, if you were to register a project full certification LBC, I mean, we would the verification for the city would be easy. The project for the developer would be intense.
We can't have those standards prepared by August 12th.
No, we would, those standards are published.
I understand that, but we have to adopt your code structure, your zone structure by August 12th. Then we would have to go in and adopt. If you,
so if that was
Are
our,
you saying that even the framework that Landmark has proposed is too incomplete?
Yes,
Okay.
But-
It's not just.
that's
like,
my
even-
opinion. That's
Okay,
just my
good.
opinion.
So
and-
it's
and
not just the
planning commission
standards
agreed.
they've proposed, but they haven't even proposed language that that establishes the structure for us to play around with the standards in.
You already have fairly detailed SAR standards and RC standards in those two North Corridor zones that, are not inconsequential. Those could be expanded upon and developed in greater detail, but getting that done by the expiration of the moratorium would be a challenge, I think.
Right. I was thinking more about the overlay component, because I think that's something that we want, so that there is a level of legislative discretion, at least while we're figuring things out.
I'm gonna follow up with you, Kaylin, because I think you might be onto something. Because honestly, starting off, LBC, again, for us to, as a city, to verify that, very easy. Standards are already in place and adopted as part of their framework. So that being like a box. The second, we have the WAHU in place. That's done. That work is done. That would be a box. And then the final, in terms of mixed use, maybe we would forgo that because that would be actually covered under LBC.
The equity piece.
The equity piece.
pedal.
And the transportation
pedal.
and so it would probably be covered in the interim. But it would be interesting to just have an overlay that says, unless you want to do a hotel, you got to do it LBC. I mean, we're talking like they would have to harvest their own energy. They would have to harvest their own water for.
I was thinking of doing an exception for the water, actually, and having like some of the less stringent standard, because I think that's going to be a
They would be like composting toilets.
heavy lift for
so I have a question.
lodging.
I'm totally in favor of LBC, but my question again is, I guess it's a process question. Like, the Planning Commission is about to have a public hearing, and we have till August 12th. So if we add those things, do we add another public hearing so people know that that's a component?
Yeah, potentially. There is a concern that if the issues that you asked to be included in the ordinance were never really given to the public for consideration at the public hearing stage, that presents a problem for us, and that's one of the timing issues. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that you're talking about living building code standards and so forth, and I don't presume to be an expert on those, but what I can say is that the state building code it's mandated at the state level, and it preempts local regulations. And so we have to be really careful about mandating things that the state has occupied at the state level and taken away a certain level of local discretion. Those are complexities that I hesitate to say that we could get done in the time that we have.
We would be fine on a state level. There's already an LBC registered project in Moab.
Well,
but that's of the builder's own volition.
That's right.
Completely different than us as government stepping in and saying, you're going to build to this standard.
That's
that is
the difference.
Completely separate. It's not the same thing. That's the concern.
Yeah, if I want to build my house to an LBC standard, I can, but it's a big difference for the government, local government, Moab, to say, you shall build your house to that, or that building to that standard.
Let's talk about it after. This is a conversation that could go on for a long time.
Yeah, and admittedly, there
Yeah,
are
Karen?
a lot of nuances.
Just the last question, what's happening August 13th?
Nothing, we're gonna have this passed.
The day after.
It's gonna be like Y2K when all the computers crashed and things fell out of the sky.
No, I'm just, I'm,
So no new, we would, I mean, the
Nothing.
regulations are changed, so we would not be accepting applications for new overnight accommodations.
Just as we are right now.
right.
So the
And
short
we
answer
can
is
hold, and
nothing.
we can hold on to that. I think I asked the last time. We can do that for how long? I mean, while we're working on, what is,
I'm not sure it's necessarily, well, and I don't mean to pretend like I'm an attorney, because these guys are and I'm not, but, you know, it's not that it's not legal, because they have other beneficial use of those properties. There are lots of other
Okay.
uses they can do. It's perception, that we're closing down, you know, the tourist accommodations, and what the state legislature does with it, or what potential developers, if they, you know, want to do with that. I mean, they certainly
They
could.
felt like you flexed your muscle too much when you took away plastic bags, and they contemplated taking your ability to take away plastic bags away. I mean, it is a real consideration. You have to weigh into this. I'm not telling you to back down. I'm not telling you to be afraid, but you cannot act like, well, on the state, we're okay. I mean, you can't just say that and then therefore it is.
Well, that's why want to explore the option of having an
that.
overlay zone
And I
on
like it.
August 13th.
Yeah, and I like that idea. We need to focus in on.
What's achievable?
No. We need to focus in on what we can do in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah.
no, yes.
All right, well,
I can take
then
a look
the
at it.
direction to planning commission, then, will be, like, I don't want to see a planning commission meeting without overlay accommodations on the agenda. Right?
Right. Once this,
Or
on the
overlay.
13th.
Overlay on the agenda. I didn't mean to say accommodations, but overlays for consideration.
You mean like within the?
After.
Oh, after.
Yeah, because we've, as a council, said, we'd like to see this, and then planning commission doesn't, it's not on the agenda for planning commission. So,
I understand.
like, what Kaylin is saying is, I think, good,
I think it's great.
and should be
I really
followed up
do.
on.
Yeah,
And
that's the point I'm making. I think it's great. I think we can go that route. We got to look into it.
But
I
Caitlin
just want
wants-
to get around the first curve before we start
All
heading
right,
on the second. one. That's
but
all.
then, it's just
Yeah.
like running a river. There's
Yeah.
just the first big drop.
Right.
We got 2 more big drops.
Right. There
you
And
go.
then we got new rapids emerging because Lake Powell is going down.
And we didn't
So-
scout this before we,
did not
this is
scout.
read and run.
So Kaylin, are you suggesting that we come up with an overlay to apply to the north end of town on August 12th? By August 12th?
Well,
No, no.
I kind of was because of my concerns about the political risk that Joel just mentioned, but I understand that it's probably impractical, and so, and you were giving me that clear message,
Yeah,
so.
I'm totally comfortable with where we're going and the slow roll out of where we're going.
Yes.
I'm totally fine with that. My whole thing 2 weeks ago was, I was getting the impression, we were giving the impression that this was a long-term solution,
Oh.
shutting it down. And that was where me and Chris talked to you guys about, we need to be really clear with people that long-term, this isn't realistic.
Okay, so do you need more clarity about what the council thinks about C2?
Well, I know that, Mike sort of outlined the 2 extremes and then in the middle. And in the middle, I think, is kind of where the planning commission has been going. And I kind of heard the council generally agreeing with that
Yes.
at this point.
Okay.
So do I need to create an option that allows vacant parcels to apply for new nightly rentals? What I'm hearing is no.
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 Okay. Is everybody good with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Nora.
Cool. Thank you.
We are on to
job,
new
Nora.
business, section 12.1, ordinance
We ever tell you how nice it is you're here, okay?
2019-20.
I'm gonna tell you again how nice it is you're here, okay?
Ordinance 2019-20, an ordinance imposing a temporary ban on the discharge of fireworks within certain areas of the city of Moab.
So, Mayor.
Discussion and consideration of ordinance 2019-20, an ordinance imposing a temporary ban on the discharge of fireworks within certain areas of the city of Moab.
So essentially, this is identical to what was passed and implemented last year. The only difference is, and it's entirely your guys' call on whether or not you want to do this, we've allowed fireworks to be used across the street here at the ballpark or at Swanee Park. And the idea in that was that we do not want people using them down along the creeks where there is brush and there is a fire hazard, and that is a lot of people who live in the community who's in that region. So we wanted to give them a safe, viable option where they could go and light fountains. We're still, aerials are still in there that are being stricken. So, but we felt that the parks that are in the interior of the community that don't have a lot of overgrown foliage, they're green, they're maintained, they have sprinkling, they have water. So we, as a city staff, discussed it and thought the idea of opening those two parks to the community to be able to go and do fireworks safely in a controlled environment where there's not a lot of weeds, where it is green, was an idea that needed kicked around. So if we don't go that route and we go back to last year, that's okay too. We just wanted to present it.
So will you be running the sprinklers concurrently with the
If
fireworks?
there was yes. If there was a fire, we just crank them out.
So we did have some questions on the shared sheet, and one of them was, have we shared this idea with the fire department?
We did not run it by the fire department. We ran it by our public works departments and those who run our parks and the garbage. And our concerns are, for the most part, someone melting one of our garbage cans by putting a fountain that's hot in the garbage.
Well,
So
liability-wise, again, living in the neighborhood, I mean, I've definitely seen people set things off in the parks unofficially, because one of my questions was, have we ever officially sanctioned the parks as places for these? I don't think we have, but,
no.
okay.
I don't know that Moab has. Other communities have. A lot
Yeah.
of communities actually designate their parks as the areas in town where these
Yeah.
the only place you can.
So
do
having
it.
stood off there and seen, some things that go up 50 feet, but some that then misfired and shot across the grass 30 feet, and the fact that in here it says, you're supposed to do this 20 feet from another home or structure, I guess one of my questions is a liability question. Are we going to have staff on hand, or if something breaks out?
We're not going to have staff necessarily on hand. We're not going to assume the liability if we're putting on an event, because we're not putting on an event. We're just saying this is an open area that people can use in the park, and they can't do fireworks in the park as
Yeah.
if they came and played here. Like,
I mean-
we don't assume the liability if they go run over there and twist their knee just because
Yeah.
they're in the park running and
mean-
it's ours.
Just knowing that there are, homes nearby, big trees nearby, and just personally having seen something, shoot across laterally, so that's just one of my concerns.
Oh,
But I
and-
can see the benefit of, wanting to promote something, a place for people to do it, but these were questions I felt I should ask.
Yeah, no, and those are
Yeah.
fair questions. And those are the risks, those are the concerns, I think you have them regardless, right? If we tell everyone that the parks aren't open and all the neighbors around it are still, they're 200 feet from the creek, they can all legally do their fireworks or fountains that we're permitting anyways. So by us telling the community that they can't use the park, everyone in the surrounding neighborhood could still be using their fireworks. So I don't know that we're eliminating it. to be honest.
I would just like to comment that we are doing a 4th of July celebration at the park. And I don't know that I feel super comfortable with people just lighting fireworks off with kids around and other people.
And
So-
that's absolutely carrying consideration. The only reason we chose these two parks to even possibly do this idea was Rotary's obviously up by the creek. So these were the only two that kind of had an interior, were green, that kind of fit the mold. So again, if you say no, none of the parks, and go back to where we were, you're not going to get any blowback from staff, that's for sure.
Right.
But we did want to kind of throw out an option for those who did live along the creek, who were basically banning from being able to do anything. And rightfully so. We've had fires and all sorts of problems down in that area. So the school district has banned fireworks on all their properties. If we have at this point as well, and we ban that area, which we're completely within our right to do so. So I don't want to make it sound like we're being overbearing. We're not. It's for the safety of the community. It's completely logical and reasonable. But, it's just an idea of those who do live in that area. Do we want to provide them an area where they can go do some fireworks?
Thank you for doing that.
What about just doing it at the ball field?
Yeah.
Well, before we decide on that, one of my concerns is, I mean, I also put some stuff in the shared document, but I don't know that anybody looked at it, about some inconsistent language in there. In some places, we're taking out possession and sale, and other places, we're leaving it.
We shouldn't be taking out possession or sale. So last year, the language had possession and sale being removed in the ordinance that was passed. Under state code, you're not allowed to eliminate possession and sale.
The reason for that, I'm sorry, Joel, to interrupt. The ordinance last year, it had a ban on the sale, possession, or discharge of prohibited fireworks, which are, you know, the kind that go up, that explode, Roman candles, those kinds of things. Our ordinance last year just said you can't possess those prohibited fireworks because they're illegal in Utah anyway.
Yeah.
And it was more of a public education thing.
Okay, well, the way the resolution is written now,
An ordinance.
or sorry.
Yeah, it's a ban on discharge of prohibited fireworks. It doesn't ban sale or possession.
Which is already done by state law. We were just trying to focus on the do not let them off.
So I'll just fill in the gap with a quick question. Finding D about fire restrictions on Manti La Salve, National Forest, BLM, National Parks, State of Utah. I couldn't find current fire restrictions.
So some of those are in place. They are changing daily. If you pull up the weather today, Moab got put under a red flag warning today.
But that's, okay.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, literally, we have to adjust that to what we're passing.
Mm-hmm.
That is literally gonna change by the time.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Right, I don't question the need for this, I'm just want the findings to be
Correct.
accurate.
Absolutely. So, in there right now, which ones are, I can't.
It refers to fire restrictions being in place in Manti La Salve National Forest, BLM lands, National Park Service lands, State of Utah, Grand and San Juan counties.
So, the way that we passed ours last year, and others have done the same, ours didn't expire last year. So it's, technically, if you didn't do anything, the one from last year is still in effect. So, a lot of them are the same way. They're passed, they're put into place, and until they're removed, they remain. And that's how the one you passed last year was. It says it was a temporary fire ban, but it has no expiration on it.
So we're just doing this for the benefit of the press,
Potentially.
basically.
No, because we're trying to change it to allow different areas
yeah,
that would
okay.
allow people. If you don't do anything, then we'll be back where we started.
Okay.
We had a
So-
pretty strict ordinance last year, if you
Yeah.
remember what the conditions were last year, which thankfully we're not repeating.
And, yeah,
This year.
but they're changing quickly.
So we can prohibit the sale of Class C? Okay, so then on ordinance page 1 under item E, it
No.
refers to,
Hold on.
No, I'm sorry, what was your question?
can we prohibit the sale of Class C fireworks?
No.
Okay, well then we need to change item E on the page 1 of the ordinance, which refers to, and to prohibit the possession, sale, or discharge of dangerous fireworks in all areas.
Dangerous would be illegal. And that's the language we just used last year. We didn't change any of that.
It talks about prohibit the possession, sale, or discharge of dangerous fireworks in all areas. The Class C fireworks are legal fireworks that we
Okay,
cannot prohibit.
so what are dangerous fireworks?
They're the
then,
ones
if we-
that go up and blow up.
They're
That's,
illegal. They're bottle
yeah.
rockets.
So, Roman candles, your bottle rockets, your aerial rockets.
They did this
mortar
last year, and I
shells.
found out what a pyrotechnic you were.
We went through the list, and those are, under state law, they're classified as prohibited fireworks, and so they're not legal anywhere, and, but Class C fireworks include a lot of ground kind of, cones and
They're fountains that basically
fountains
go
and
over a
things
certain
that don't
height.
explode. Those are legal, and you can't prohibit them. Local governments cannot prohibit them. What you can do is restrict their discharge in particularly fire-prone or dangerous areas, that we designated the creek bottoms.
So
areas
literally
such as-
all we're doing under the state statute is eliminating them from 200 feet of the creek, which is exactly what we did last year, and off our private property is this property the city owns and assumes liability on. That's all you did last year. You didn't ban, you didn't make it illegal to sell them, you didn't do any of that. All you did was say you can't have them on our property and you can't have them 200 feet of the creek. The only difference this year is we're saying you can't have them 200 feet of the creek and you maybe can have them on a couple of our properties.
And you're saying that language is fine that Ronnie just pointed out?
Well, so is the issue that we don't, dangerous is ambiguous?
That's part of it, plus,
I don't know. Go ahead. I'm
I
sorry.
mean, I do think the document would be a lot clearer if every place that said dangerous, you just use prohibited, because dangerous isn't explained anywhere.
Well, in our motion, we can change that finding to prohibited.
Because the other thing that's confusing is under the purpose, it says the purpose of the ordinance is to enact a ban on the discharge of certain fireworks throughout the entire limits of the city of Moab, except where indicated herein, and to ban the discharge of other types of fireworks in areas that are particularly susceptible to fire. But then in the earlier page, it refers to banning some in all areas.
This is verbatim from last year.
Okay,
You
well,
should have
maybe
gutted
didn't.
this last year.
Yeah.
This should have been done by now.
Okay.
Wait a minute, we had, to be fair,
We're rolling it out gradually.
local, this is lesson on state preemption 101. We talk about it oftentimes where the state, interest groups at the state legislature are very good at taking away the power of local governments to regulate in certain areas. The fireworks lobby is one of those. And they've prohibited local governments from completely banning the discharge of fireworks. They do allow local governments to restrict certain types of fireworks and also to protect certain fire-prone areas. Last year, we had we went as far as we could with our ordinance because if you'll recall, we had some of the worst drought conditions last year that we've had in decades.
And we had a fire that,
Almost burned down half the town.
Yeah. And the fireworks lobby still went nuts, the people were doing it.
So.
I'm just saying, I can't understand it reading it, but that's fine. But the other point is, I mean, I don't have to go to the park to shoot off my fireworks, right? I can do it in my backyard or in the
can.
city, or I can do
Are
it
you
on the
200 feet
street.
of the creek?
If you're
Yeah.
more than 200 feet
can.
away, it's totally fine.
More than 200 feet from the creek.
But
Yeah.
if you're shooting off Roman candles that go up in the air, those are prohibited fireworks.
Well,
And
regardless though, right? I couldn't shoot those off in the park.
No,
They're
they're
illegal.
prohibited, they're illegal.
they're illegal.
Like, nothing we're doing is making bottle rockets legal.
Right.
Yeah.
They're
But I'm-
illegal.
I'm just
We're
saying.
just saying, if you live on the creek, or if you just want to set them off, not at your house, but in a safe place that has sprinklers, that we're opening our lawn to that activity. So then we just, as council, should decide whether or not we want to open the lawn or keep the lawn closed.
Okay. Personally, I'd like to keep it closed. It's noisy for the neighborhood. There are trees nearby. Yeah.
So I would entertain a motion that is either suggested or with an amendment. Who's going to go first?
Or it can die for a lack of motion and we can act under the old one.
Right, we can act under the old one that we have already in place. Is there a motion?
Well, I will if nobody else will, since I moved to adopt ordinance 2019-20, an ordinance imposing a temporary ban on the discharge of fireworks within certain areas of the city of Moab.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Kalen. Can we have clarification on what that just entails? I'm looking for the suggested motion.
It would
Language.
do what last year's did, but allow under the current motion would allow legal fireworks in Swanee and the ballpark.
Okay.
That's it.
Got it. So the motion would allow would open up the ball field and Swanee to what people can already set off on their private property unless they're on the creek.
May I make a substitute motion?
Go nuts.
I will, where is it? I would like to prohibit fireworks near the creek and, yet allow it at.
Just the ballpark?
At just the ballpark.
So Karen's substitute motion is to allow it just at the ballpark. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, so we are now at the fireworks, just opening up the ballpark. Same as last year, but opening up the ballpark. Y'all want any further discussion?
Well, I think I can tell you, I was up in the Mountain View subdivision on January 4th, July 4th, and there was fireworks all over town, all over the streets. I don't think anybody's going to pay any attention to whatever we write
They're
here.
illegal. And what is the fine? $1,000 bucks?
$1,000.
What, $1,000? Up to $1,000?
And the cost for the fire.
So when you see those things, you can think cha-ching, and you can report that person. Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No. I'm for a temporary ban on the discharge of fireworks, but not for permitting
So
fireworks
motion
in because of the
passes.
neighbors in this neighborhood, yeah.
Okay, motion passes 4-1. Because you voted. I did. Okay. All right. Approval against the bill of bills against the city of Moab. Is there a motion?
I move to pay the bills against the city of Moab in the amount of $1,277,506.98.
Thank you, Kalen. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Karen. Discussion?
I don't have any highlights to report. We're in the office is in transition, so it's been an interesting month of learning, but it's coming along. Changing colors of paper to distinguish who's doing what work. So, but yeah,
Excellent. All those in favor?
aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Motion to adjourn?
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
Thank you both. All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. We're adjourned at 9:18.